Welcome to the TA Disruptors podcast, where we explore some of the biggest challenges and issues facing talent acquisition, and we bring in people with different perspectives, sometimes subject matter experts, to talk about these challenges and give practical advice and different thoughts on how talent acquisition may be able to deal with them. In the first episode we talked about ChatGPT and the huge impact it's going to have on talent acquisition, and we brought in one of the experts within Arctic Shores, Jasper Wolf, our data scientist, to talk about the research he had done on that. In this episode, I am very excited to welcome another expert within the Arctic Shores team, the wonderful Jill Summers. And Jill is a occupational psychologist, starting her career with NHS Scotland, working in not just an occupational psychology perspective, but also within a clinical team, from which you then moved on to Gatton Sanderson and well into the professional occupational world, which you then continued through with various different companies, TMP. And then we fast forward to the time that you and I first met up, Jill, when you were at Amberjack and working on global projects, particularly in the early careers. And I remember very well you working on the Unilever graduate program. But today I'm going to use the opportunity to extract all the things that are in your wonderful mind about what makes task-based assessments so different and how they provide a very unique and exciting way to understand people and their suitability for different roles. So let's kick off the podcast with how you and I first met those many moons ago in Citibank offices, I seem to remember, in Canary Wharf, where I'd invited you to talk to a few of the early pioneers willing to experiment with Arctic Shores and this very strange idea of game-based assessments and how you could learn about people through the way that they do things. So why don't you share with us what was going through your mind when you first came across Arctic Shores and this very different approach to understanding people's personality, strengths and motivations.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. That's a lovely introduction, and it's my pleasure to be here today with you. In terms of what was going through my mind about task-based assessments, I was thinking, wow, this is like a really interesting and different way of doing things. I mean, having worked in the assessment world now for nearly about 20 years, I had never seen anything like it with regards to what you were originally proposing.
Yes.
So I was intrigued by that. What also interested me was the fact that I thought it could solve some of the challenges that we constantly faced in the assessment world and the development world with regards to using existing traditional psychometrics to try and understand people's skills and behaviours important for success at work. What we used to have to do was always triangulate the data and use lots of different questionnaire-based approaches because you're always reliant on someone telling you, yes, I'm resilient, or yes, I'm organised and I plan well, similar to an interview. And obviously it's self-report, so they can change the way that they answer the questions in a more favourable light. So it was always about trying to understand lots of different data and trying to gather that data to be able to get a clear and as accurate picture as possible about individuals that you could then present to the recruiting organisation, the employer, to say that this person is a strong fit for the role. So when you told me that you were using tasks to try and understand that, and tasks based on decades of neuroscience research, I was thinking, wow, this is like going to tap into the primary evidence, that directly observable evidence that I've been searching for all these years working in the field of occupational psychology. So that's what really intrigued me. Also, it was extremely pioneering. At the time, sort of 10 years ago, the word gamification was around, and in Amberjack we were looking at gamification from the perspective of making things more interesting and engaging for candidates across the end end-to-end process, but there's various ways that you can do that through reward and how you communicate with them. But from an Arctic Shores perspective, I think gamification, really what you meant was interactive and dynamic, and, you know, something that gave candidates a good experience. So for me, that's why I was intrigued by Arctic Shores, and, and why I wanted to speak to you, and why I agreed to come along and speak to Citigroup that day at Canary Wharf. So,
yes. Yeah. Well, thank you for
and
sharing
the rest is history, really.
And it is, and it set off, you know, a wonderful chain of events, and, you know, you've now been with us for 7 years. But I just going back to that sort of early point, it must have been quite challenging for you to start getting your mind around, you know, after you had all that training, all that traditional research and ways of doing things, very much embedded in how you do things and how the world did things at the time, to then say, actually, there is a different approach. And was it just the challenges that you were seeing with traditional assessments that prompted you to say, actually, maybe there is a better way here? Or was it just, oh, this is gamification, it sounds sort of quite interesting as something just to go and explore?
Yeah, I think it was multifactorial. So looking at customers' challenges and the fact that they wanted to give candidates a better experience, that they wanted to eradicate bias, so look at adverse impact across demographics, and that was really important to customers and emerging 10, 15 years ago as a real problem. They wanted to level the playing field for people. I think another area was just that, you know, trying to be really accurate about matching that individual to the role, and having to do that in a number of different ways historically, using a number of different questionnaire-based tools, aptitude tools, you know, combined with interviews, lots of different data in order to get a fairly you know, rich picture, I suppose, of how someone is likely to behave in a role. And, you know, when I worked in executive assessment, the question that I was always asked and put under pressure by boards, presenting to boards, was, well, can you predict 100% how this person's going to behave if they have to lead our organisation through a change, or if they're in a very, you know, challenging or difficult environment, how are they going to respond? And, you know, my answer would be, we can never 100% predict how human beings are going to behave in any way, but all we can do is look at the data and say that they are likely to, and, you know, this is the evidence that we've got. So it was multifactorial. Gamification was part of that, because I think that fed into the candidate experience and making things interesting for candidates and giving something back for candidates. And my experience in the early days of assessments were that candidates, at whatever level of role they were applying to, didn't used to get any feedback back at all from assessment processes, which I think is just a pretty poor experience when you're dedicating a lot of your time to actually complete a questionnaire or to complete an interview or whatever it might be, to not get anything back, no feedback back about that is just not great from a candidate perspective. So
yes, and
it's all of the above, really.
Yes, I was shocked when I discovered that. Obviously, I come from outside of the industry, and what I suppose one of the gamification elements that sort of brought very much to play and felt that could bring some real value into the psychometric world was that focus on the candidate experience. And that extended not just to the user interface, but also giving some feedback. And I remember at the time talking with Safe, my co-founder, that just being shocked that there was no feedback that was given. And I think you highlight there two really interesting things about, I suppose, what we set up to achieve with Arctic Shores at the beginning. One was, how do we deliver something there's a better candidate experience? Yeah. But it has to be more than that. Yeah. And I like your point about primary evidence. And I think that's what brought that connection between us. Yeah, that you from a strong occupational psychology point of view, it's all about how do we get a slightly better prediction. We're never going to get it perfect, as you so well articulated, but we certainly want it to be better than just human intuition on this. And so how do we get under the surface of what really motivates somebody and what their instinctive, innate, as you say, primary drivers are going to be. And I think that's really what the Arctic Shores assessment was about, and partly why we changed it from game-based assessment to task-based assessment.
Yes.
And I'd like to just talk through with you that sort of subtle change, because that's how it started with us. But the fundamentals haven't changed. We're just changing the language. And how does that for you change going from a game-based assessment to task-based assessment? Is it just a language change in there, or is it something more fundamental? How do you see that?
I think it's something more fundamental. So I think the language change is really important, because I think originally with game-based assessment, it perhaps would lead customers to think that it's going to be too gamified, too much fun. It's not, candidates are not going to take it seriously enough.
Yes.
When actually it is a serious assessment. It's assessing people's skills or soft skills, the success criteria important for success at work, across cognition, across behaviours associated with personality. So it is, it is really important, and we want candidates to take it seriously and apply themselves when they're completing the assessment. So the language change is important from that perspective, and it also just sets candidates up for success as well. I think they get them in the right sort of frame of mind in order to complete the assessment. Task-based assessment to me means something completely different. So the movement towards task-based assessment to me is asking candidates to complete, and using the advancements of technology to do this, because years ago, this is what the NHS used to do, using these tasks face-to-face with people to try and understand what's going on in their brain and the individual differences. But using the advancements of technology, using dynamic, interactive, puzzly type tasks in order for a candidate to complete them, so that we can get that directly observable evidence of the candidate, completing a task, and them demonstrating their determination through that task, demonstrating their perseverance, their ability to overcome adversity, obstacles, all the important things at work that you want to see. So you want to see someone demonstrating that in front of you, and we're able to do that with tasks rather than asking them questions. So the drawback for me with the question-based style was always around, okay, it's secondary evidence I'm getting. The person's telling me, yes, I'm resilient, but of course, if you really want to understand how someone's going to behave in any situation, of course you would rather observe them doing it and see them doing something rather than them telling you, because there's all sorts of problems associated with that. So I think the movement towards task-based assessment really is just a great umbrella term to convey exactly what we're expecting candidates to do, and the output out of that as well.
I think that's really interesting, Jill, and you highlight that actually the world of occupational psychology, which really started to kick off in the 1950s, began its roots from observing how people did things.
Exactly.
And what held people back from that was being able to scale that, and hence we started using pen and paper and asking people to tell us how they might behave rather than observing them. And I think it's really interesting how the point about task-based assessment is that they're leveraging the advancements in technology that have happened in that time frame. But one of the things that you must come across all the time, and it'd be interesting to see how you explain this to clients, how does pushing a button mean that I can understand what your personality is? Because it just feels so different from what we're used to, which is, if you want to understand about me, Robert, then you need to ask me, Robert, about how I do things, because I'm surely the best person to tell anybody about what I'm good at and how I might behave. And so this whole idea that you could be pressing buttons and really learn about me, how does that work?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, and it is one that is asked by prospects. You get asked it a lot. We get asked it a lot, even by customers that are already on board with us. So maybe I'll just explain from my perspective, how task-based assessments work, and then bring it to life with through one of our actual tasks. So A task-based assessment is working through the fact that someone is interacting with these very short tasks. And what we're doing at Arctic Shores, and I don't want to give away our secrets, but what we're doing is basically trying to understand those data points. So we gather about 12,000 data points from candidates in the way each individual candidate, this isn't multiple candidates, in the way that they actually interact with the task itself. So that is, how do they click, how are they clicking the buttons? Do they pause when they get some negative feedback about the way that they've interacted with the task? Do they take quite a long time in relation to other people to read some part of the task or make some different type of response? All of that type of information are data, those 12,000 data points. They feed into our scoring keys on that particular task. And then those scoring keys are validated in the way that you would validate any other psychometric tool. So our psychometrics team, interestingly, is made up of not just occupational psychologists, but neuroscientists, data scientists, psychometricians, statisticians, people that have got maths backgrounds. So they're working together as a collaborative unit in order to understand these scoring keys, validate them, so that we basically know that what we're claiming to measure is actually what we're measuring, and we're doing that in a reliable way. So that's how a task-based assessment is different. And we, at Arctic Shores, we never give away the secrets of our scoring keys to anyone. We tell customers, and we go through with customers how we build their, what we would call like their success profile. So what they're actually screening or sifting candidates against in terms of what does success look like, what does great look like in the job, and that's their IP, and they can keep that profile and we can tweak it and make changes as the data evolves. But the scoring keys themselves are the sort of magic behind what is validated against well-known and established constructs that have been around for a long time. The neuroscience tasks, Arctic Shores haven't just made them up, as you're very well aware. The psychometrics, our scientists have based this on 30 years or more of neuroscience, so decades and decades of neuroscience research. So as I mentioned previously, these are well-known neuroscience tasks that have been used in hospital settings, research settings in the past in order to understand how someone's brain is working, what parts of an individual's brain is working when they're making certain, going through certain cognitive processes, making certain decisions, judgments, when they're actually behaving in a different way towards different situations and different people. So they're well-known tasks. We have just, with the advancements of technology, brought them to life, validated them and made them work in a setting where you can use a mobile phone, you can use a tablet, you can use a computer to complete them. And we've made them obviously look nicer and a lot more candidate-friendly. So that's, the sort of high-level science behind our assessments. If I bring it to life a little bit more around maybe just an example of one of the tasks, so quite a well-known one that everyone is familiar with is our security code breaker. So it's the one where the dial spins round. What the candidate needs to do is interact with this task and try and stop the dial moving on a certain number in order to unlock a series of sort of codes or locks to unlock the safe. So the dial moves around at varying speeds and changes with the way that the candidate interacts, and they have to, the number that they've got to stop it on changes as well. So they basically have to press a button on their phone or on their computer, the space bar, in order to stop that spinning dial when the number flashes up in the correct place. And as I say, it moves at different speeds, it changes, and it interacts with them as they're interacting with the task. Obviously, with that type of task, candidates will, it's dynamic, it's interesting, it's exciting, it's like a puzzle, so candidates engage with it really well. And then they start to understand, actually, it's changing, and actually I need to speed up. So we're measuring lots of different aspects that are important for success at work. So from that description, hopefully you can see that we're measuring sort of core cognition, processing speed. As the dial's moving around, you have to be thinking quite quickly in order to interact with it and click on the right place. We're looking at how does someone persevere. So if they get it wrong and it flashes up that wasn't the right code as they've clicked on it, how do they then respond? How long do they take to then get back into the task? So we're measuring sort of determination, perseverance, all those attributes and positive success criteria important for success at work, linked to things like delivering results. So that's essentially how our tasks work, and that's an example, hopefully brought to life through Codebreaker.
Yes, no, thank you for sharing that. So I get that. So it's their little micro shifts in behaviour that's giving an indication of how they're thinking. And of course that all makes sense, that what your personality at the end of the day is nothing more than the chemical and electrical activity that's going on in your brain. And so if you can find a way of picking up proxy measures for that chemical electrical activity that's going on in your brain through pressing buttons, then you can understand what's happening in somebody's mind. One of the worries that I'm sure many people still have about that, so when you explain, and the way that you've explained it starts to make sense, that we can learn about people from that way. But the big worry about anything that's task-based, and particularly in the way that you just described that last task, is that somehow there's some sort of skill that's involved in it. And how does the science behind the way that Arctic Shores have developed that avoid that challenge that we end up measuring somebody's ability to quickly press a button and respond to it, as opposed to largely what's going on in their mind?
Absolutely. So as you would expect from the team that I just described, our psychometrics team, you know, they're professionals and from a lot of diverse backgrounds. They follow psychometric test publishing guidelines, you know, through the British Psychological Society, European standards, American standards, when they've been designing our assessment. So they're going through exactly the same methodology that you would take if you wanted to design a new personality questionnaire. So they're doing all of the same things that you would expect, you know, other test publishers to do when trying to make sure that the science is actually there and it sits behind it. So that includes, you know, testing before we actually, you know, even went live with the Arctic Shores assessment all those years ago. You know, I remember speaking to you in the very early days before I came on board, and the research team actually was spent, you know, a good couple of years actually just researching and building out these tasks and validating them and collecting all that evidence for the technical manual. So they are doing group differences studies to understand are there differences between, you know, people that may be younger and that we might think might game more. Obviously these are all anecdotal, and some of these things are myths. And, you know, so what we do is they've tested all of that to understand are there any differences across different groups of people, depending on people's backgrounds. There might be differences between male and females. You know, what does that look like, and are there group differences there? And our research shows that from a, you know, have you got an advantage if you're really good at clicking buttons?
Yes.
No, that's not the case. There is not a difference between someone who's got hours and hours and hours of gaming experience and, you know, traditional gaming of playing Nintendo or PlayStation or whatever versus someone that doesn't.
Yes.
So, so there are not statistical differences there. So we've done all of that, and that's all documented, because that, you know, that can be a worry for organisations. But the tasks work in the same way that they would in the medical setting as well, and, you know, they're not all these years ago when they were used in, you know, hospitals and things, it was the same, you know, it's the same principles. So someone that, you know, it wasn't full of gamers at that point. Absolutely. And also, you know, they work equally well for men and women, and there are differences. I'm not saying there aren't genuine differences in personality traits between men and women, because there are, but that's a whole different podcast.
Yes.
There are some genuine differences for good reasons, for genetic and biological reasons, but in terms of like gaming type differences or differences between people with different backgrounds, our research shows that they're not significant.
Yes.
And that's documented in all of the research and the you know, the technical manual that we have.
Yes.
We also have adjustments in place, because another question that leads on from that is like reasonable adjustments, and what can we do for candidates that, you know, under the that have disabilities, what can we do there? So we make reasonable adjustments, and our psychometrics team again is constantly collecting data and research, you know, from the demographics that we get through our assessments, with the millions of people that have completed them now, so that we can make adjustments in the right direction for people. So that's what we do. We can apply scoring key adjustments for people that have got dyslexia, dyspraxia. There's different adjustments depending on what adjustment or accommodation that you might need.
Yes. And what's interesting, I think, about the way that we accommodate the neurodivergent community is different from traditional assessments, and I'm going to explore in a second a bit more about some of those differences. But because it's task-based rather than question-based, we're not presenting people with an extra bit of time or something in order to be able to process something that they struggle to process, rather than the tasks, anybody complete the task, but to ensure that there are any cognitive differences that come about because of neurodiversity, that people who are in the neurodivergent spectrum aren't in any way disadvantaged, and that can be done behind the scenes rather than presenting them with a challenge as they face what they're being asked to do, and then have them having to accommodate as well as the assessment having to accommodate as well. So thank you for that explanation. Let's explore then a little bit more about, having explained the science, you must all the time be asked about what are the similarities and the differences between a task-based assessment and traditional assessments, because are the way that Arctic Shores does its task-based assessment so fundamentally different from question-based assessments that it means that people have to get their mind around a completely different style and approach and personality framework, or actually there's some overlap, but there's also some differences. Perhaps you could share your perspective on that.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. I mean, I don't think it's like so wildly different in terms of the framework that sits underneath. I mean, we're still, adhering to, we still believe like what the rest of the research community believes around, personality factors and models, and we're using all of that best practice research as well. So the fundamentals of what we're doing and what we're trying to measure, and we're not saying that we're measuring, anything that's wildly different from what a traditional psychometric provider would measure in terms of what's important in the world of work. From a behavioural or a soft skills perspective, or behaviours associated with personality and cognition. So that's similar. The fact that you can use our assessment in an early stage SIFT to support with a number of different challenges, that's similar. But I would say that that's where the similarities end, actually. So, yeah. I've racked my brain, Robert, and those are the similarities.
No, fair enough.
In terms of differences, the main differences are it's task-based, it's dynamic, it's engaging, so that brings lots of advantages, increasing advantages nowadays as well, which we can talk about in a moment with the advancements of generative AI. But the advantages that brings for employers it's dynamic, it's engaging. We've got evidence to show that it reduces anxiety for candidates. It's not timed. So therefore, the candidate experience is optimised. They get a candidate feedback report within 30 seconds of completing the assessment. So again, candidate experience is optimised. Diversity, we do a lot of work on diversity, and I know that's one of the reasons you and SAFE founded the business in the first place, to level the playing field across all demographics. So we do a lot of work around adverse impact and, running our profiles through models before we actually go live with customers. And a lot of work on our platform with regards to that as well, that we've just talked about around reasonable adjustments and the design of the assessment. So we're levelling the playing field, so employers will be able to achieve their diversity statistics, which we've seen with the likes of Siemens, and why Amazon is interested in working with us now, because they want to make sure things are fair and get the same number of females and males to the end stage of their processes. They want a diverse mix of individuals that they can appoint to roles. So that's another advantage.
And I'd like just to talk a little bit about that, because at the end of the day, what makes a good selection tool is whether you are first putting forward better suited candidates to hiring managers to select from, and then ultimately, do they perform in the job better than either the previous process or just randomly bringing people in. Can you perhaps share then how a task-based assessment has brought about some improvements or differences with some of the clients that you've worked with over the years?
So you make a good point around predictability. That was going to be my third one. You know, you want to be able to identify the candidates at an early stage that are very closely matched in terms of matching your success criteria that's going to help them perform in the job. And then you want to be able to make sure they do perform in the job. And is there a correlation? Is there a link there? So we do a lot of work around that, around the predictive analytics there. And I think that's like hugely important. Mm-hmm. So I would say that that's something that a task-based assessment allows you to do, because you're gathering that directly observable evidence. We talked about the 12,000 data points that we get per candidate. We've got huge volumes of data there per candidate that we can then use with our customers. We can either use data that we already have that exists to show them and demonstrate to them, look at the predictive nature. If we run this success profile through this model that we've already got, look at the outcome that's given other customers in similar sectors to you. Yes. And then we also do that when they're onboarded with us, as part of their ongoing sort of customer journey as well. So we look at their points of value and we demonstrate that to them as they're on that hopefully continuous journey with Arctic Shores.
Yes. Yeah. So they get that predictability.
They do.
And that's really important. Yeah. Jill, one of the other points, just picking up on something that you said earlier, was 12,000 data points. Mm-hmm. It's a huge amount of data there. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that people will be concerned about is that, gosh, there's this huge amount of data. Does that make it really complex and difficult as to how hiring managers or organisations are able to use then that data to help them find who are the right candidates to be talking to and hiring?
So the short answer is no, it doesn't. It's very simple, and that's also one of the sort of founding principles of Arctic Shores, was to try and bring psychometrics to the masses, make it understandable, user-friendly, free from jargon, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to join UNSAFE in the first place, because I think it's really important that if we have these tools, everybody should be able to use them and get insights from them, and it should be across society. So it's very simple with our platform. Within sort of 3 to 4 sessions, which can vary from 30 minutes to 60 minutes each, depending on what customers want to achieve, we can onboard them, and that's their training and how to use our platform, how to set up their assessments, how to invite their candidates, and how to interpret their reports, because we've designed everything to be as simple and as jargon-free as possible. In terms of the outputs that customers receive, we've talked about the candidate report, so candidates get that. Customers can view on their dashboards on the platform, ranking in terms of if they want to sift their candidates, who's coming out as top from an overall score on their success criteria. It's also broken down across the areas that are important for them. So we talk about sort of essential criteria for the job, so very clear scores in that respect. And they also get reports for their hiring managers and their TA teams, which give a lot of insights into the individual candidates' strengths and development areas. And then last but not least, if they want to use it, they've also got an interview guide as well. So we try and make it as simple and as user-friendly as possible, and as easy to get up and running and start using the products in the first place.
Yes, and no big training,
no 3 years worth of training or
qualification.
No, absolutely.
I remember right at the beginning being surprised and somewhat shocked that for anybody to start using a traditional psychometric assessment, they had to go through a 2 or 3 day training program, several £1,000s in order to be certified, which would then enable a person to then give feedback on that, rather than just thinking, well, okay, how do we just make the language simpler? So that everybody can.
And how we put safeguarding around that to make sure that, yes, absolutely, our tests are psychometric tests and they're serious tests, but we've got a lot of safeguarding around that for customers so that they don't misinterpret anything or they don't use the data in the wrong way. That's our platform has been specifically designed to support that and ensure that they don't fall into these pitholes and trip over themselves. So.
And I think that's one of the other important points around this, which is that people don't misuse the data, and that's the other part of all of this is that there's a training to be able to give feedback, but there's also a requirement in the design and the use of any psychometric assessment that an individual perspective or bias or just misunderstanding about what the data is or means results in poor decisions being made or decisions that don't actually relate to the role or don't have any connection to what success looks like in the role. Now, how does the Arctic Shores platform?
So there's a lot of guidance on the Arctic Shores platform. To customers can self-serve, but there's a lot of guidance and safeguarding around how they do that. We've got a number of norm groups that are appropriate across the world, and we give guidance as to which, we kind of force which ones should be used based on, a set of questions that we're asking customers. They are handheld through their onboarding, so they're paired with a customer success manager from the customer success team and a business psychologist from professional services to onboard them and make sure that they're comfortable. And some customers want more onboarding than others, and we'll spend a little bit more time with some customers than others. But again, there's a set sort of best practice onboarding that we will do, and that's the sort of fundamentals for everyone. And then over and above, we, depending on where they are in their hiring for potential or skills-based hiring journey, we will then support them from there. So there's a lot of support and guidance, a lot of digestible content on the knowledge base that they can go back to as well. So it's a bit of a sort of continuous loop and continuous support that we provide at Arctic Shores.
But the world is all being turned on its head at the moment now.
Yeah, very interesting times, Robert.
So we have very interesting times because we have generative AI that, as I like to point out and had a few discussions on these podcasts with people, being like a calculator that can level the playing field, but also can reduce individual differences if you take a traditional recruiting selection approach to it. How do you see that task-based assessments are going to help organizations deal with generative AI, both in terms of selection, but also one of the things that we've talked about a bit here is it's not just how they measure, but it's what they should be measuring.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think it's very interesting times. I know generative AI and ChatGPT is one of your favourite topics, and so it should be for most people, actually. I think it's going to transform the world in which we live in. I'm reading a book at the moment actually called Scary Smart. And basically by 2049, Mo Gaudat, who was a commercial director within Google, says that artificial intelligence is going to be a billion times smarter than the smartest humans. So to give you a comparison there, that's like human beings having the intelligence of a fly and artificial intelligence being as intelligent as Einstein. Right. So I think, ChatGPT and generative AI and, artificial intelligence in general has got implications for the world in which we work, the jobs, not only that are going to be needed, but also, how do we actually get the right fit candidates into these roles in the first place, and what are the skills that are important for the world of work in the future. I think with regards to ChatGPT and how that's impacting recruitment processes and why talent leaders should be paying attention is because we've seen from our own research, and have already started to hear from our customers and prospects that they are noticing differences at the later stages of their process, because candidates are using ChatGPT as they should, in order to try and support themselves throughout these processes. Yes. So we saw from our research that with some traditional psychometrics, you can use ChatGPT to get the 98th percentile on verbal reasoning, numerical reasoning similarly extremely high. At the moment, ChatGPT just has a slight issue with images, but again, it's advancing every day, so it's going to overcome that. And in a matter of months, I think we will see it be able to digest images and understand that 70th percentile on situational judgment tests, and it's learning every day. So again, that will continue to improve. 70th percentile on the bar exam, apparently, the legal bar exam. So unbelievable, incredibly intelligent. I think ChatGPT ChatGPT's got a IQ of 152, they say. Average human IQ is 100.
Yes.
And again, it's advancing every day. So I think we've got a real issue on our hands with recruitment processes. How do you know you're getting an authentic assessment of an individual, or if they're using ChatGPT to get through the initial stages and then later stages of your recruitment process? The one easy answer to me is ChatGPT cannot break a task-based assessment.
Yes.
So use a task-based assessment at the start of your process and get an authentic assessment of the skills required for success in the roles that you're recruiting to. That would be my that would be my answer.
Great thoughts. And I, when you shared that first stat from Scary Smart that artificial intelligence will be 1 billion times more intelligent than the average human, that creates, I imagine, for a lot of people, quite a lot of concern. And
absolutely.
Are humans going to have any role to play in knowledge-based work? Where I personally am sort of reassured that humans will continue to have a role to play in the future is things like curiosity, creative problem solving. These are the things that the human mind, because we have a worldview framework that I think artificial intelligence is a long way off from being able to mimic or even to replicate. And so you can have something that's 1 billion times smarter, and we see that in chess and some of the sort of cognitive games, Go being another one. And I was pleased to see that earlier this year that they did some research in Berkeley, California, university there, where an average Go player with a little bit of creativity and problem solving was able to beat the best artificial intelligence Go computer program. So there is still hope for us, and I think it comes back to where different types of human skills will now be important in the future from what we used to value in the past.
Yeah, and I think that's where I totally agree that curiosity, innovation, potential creativity, interpersonal skills, relationship management, all of those types of human skills that we see that we can measure through the task-based assessment are going to be continuously important in the world of work. Where we're going to have computers maybe replacing some more repetitive or intelligence type tasks that used to take us a very long time to do, but there's absolutely still going to be a place for people. I mean, I have to say that I'm a psychologist.
Well,
I agree with you around that skill set for the future, and I think it'll be ever evolving and ever changing, but definitely in that creativity space, that interpersonal skills, relationship management type space, and so that's why it's more important than ever to try and identify those skills at very early stages in an authentic and genuine way, and make sure you keep those people in your process and they can contribute to your organisation. And it's about how people are going to optimise and work with machines and artificial intelligence, I suppose, in their roles in the future as well. So, that sort of that learning agility for that tech savvy sort of approach to how do you use the tools that we've designed and that we have available, how do you use them to your advantage to optimise the world of work.
Yes, you make a great point there, Jill, and I heard the other day the term that AI rather than artificial intelligence should really be augmented intelligence, and that's really what you're saying there, that the human skills will continue to be valuable, but we will be able to get some of the cognitive pieces done by artificial intelligence now, but it'll just help us do the things that we need to do in a better way and less reliant on cognitive processing. Yeah. So, Jill, one of the other things that you mentioned in there was some of the challenges around bias with traditional assessments versus task-based assessments. Nobody is building in bias, of course, into the way that they design things, but just the very nature of different styles of assessments means that some areas are better served through a task-based approach than through a question-based approach. So can you share with us how some of those differences have been improved and some of the challenges, I suppose, with timed tests and the pressure and the anxiety that being timed causes, and how a task-based assessment overcomes some of those.
Yeah, sure. So the task-based assessments associated with the personality tasks that we have, they're not timed, so that takes some of the anxiety away. As I mentioned earlier, we make a number of reasonable adjustments, which of course so do traditional test publishers, but we also try and continue to build on the data that we have, because we have millions of candidates that have completed, and we've got 12,000 data points each time. So we look at that data constantly and understand if there are any differences emerging, and then how does that impact on our methodology around reasonable adjustments. What we also do is, because we have got a lot of this data, is that we're looking at adverse impact and bias against success profiles, so against what the customer wants to sift against, or what they want to make their decisions against before customers go live. And we are in a very collaborative and partnership way with the customer, removing that bias from our models before we go live. And I'm not going to go into that in too much detail, because that gives away some of our sort of unique methodology as to how we do that. But we do that before customers go live, so that we're using proxies and we're trying to predict with huge samples, this is what it looks like on this demographic group. This is what we want to tweak or remove, or, if you set your benchmark at this level, at the 50th or above, this is what will happen. This was what it potentially could look like. And then customers can work with us to make their decisions to say, actually, I don't want some of that creeping in, so I'm going to dial that down, etc. So we do that before go live, and then as part of our continuous cycle of improvement and customer relationship management, we also look at it on their live samples as well. So it's a continuous process of looking at that data and eradicating that bias, because that's very central to what Arctic Shores does, and it's one of the, as we mentioned, the founding principles of why you and SAFE set up the business. It was to level the playing field and have an assessment that's truly fair.
And can I just pick you up on one point about that? A couple of times you've said, the magic and the secret behind, don't want to reveal too much about that. And one of the concerns many people have is, hang on, is Arctic Shores introducing some sort of artificial intelligence into the way that he does things? And is there a black box element in there?
That's a very good point. Yeah, no, it's not a black box. So what? None of our algorithms are black box. They're what I would call, open and transparent, and they're so transparent that we share everything with the customer. So we are presenting exactly with the customer, this is exactly what you want to assess someone on, this is what your profile is going to look like, this is how it fares in terms of against these demographic groups, against the 4/5 rule, this is what it will look like if you put your pipeline of candidates through this. This is the volumes. This is how they will come out. So it's very open, and customers make their decisions about finalising that profile, how they want to use it, and then the sift, the benchmark or the cutoff that they're setting. So it's completely transparent and completely open. And one thing about Arctic Shores, which is very important to me, and I think you know this when I joined, was that I don't want to be including anything in these models or algorithms that don't make psychological sense. Yes. So if it's not job related and it can't be explained from a psychological perspective that particular behaviour, that particular skill is important for success at work in that particular job or that organisation, we shouldn't be including it. Yes. If one of my psychologists can't explain what's the rationale behind that, then we shouldn't include it. And it should be repeatable as well. It's not a model that's built that's so obscure from a data perspective that we can't repeat it each time with a similar sample of candidates. So that was really important, because I don't want to start building models that, we just put anything into, because if you throw enough things into them, then eventually something's going to stick. So,
well, that's right. To many people.
Yeah, it has to make psychological sense, and it has to be job related.
Yes.
So,
I'm glad to
and
hear
we have
that.
to be able to explain it to customers in
really
very
important.
simple language, so that they are comfortable, they know exactly what their candidates are being assessed against. Yeah.
Very useful and enlightening discussion, Jill. Thank you for sharing all your thoughts.
Always a pleasure.
It's been great to speak to you.
You too. Always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.